everybody.
Charles, normally I would ask you to turn this up in my headphones, but you are blasting this thing right now.
I try to anticipate your needs.
I think you anticipate a bit too much. This might be the first ever. Please turn this down a bit in my headphones there, Charles. Just okay, yeah. Okay.
Wow.
But now that it's at a normal rate, I'm going to have to ask you to turn it up.
You know what? I think that window is past.
Maybe just run it back. Run it back another time there, Charles.
That would be a first for the show, and I don't know if we're ready for such a technological accomplishment.
Of playing the theme song twice.
Of playing it twice.
It's a day of firsts, though, on the FDF podcast.
It is. What a great segue. Would you like to explain why it's a day of firsts?
Because I don't think we've ever covered a TV show before, and today we are discussing The Witcher Season 1 of the TV series on Netflix.
That's right. Today we're discussing our first ever TV series, The Witcher, on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this. This basically just happened because Charles spoke about Geralt and his favorite protagonist.
It's true.
And we got into what I thought was a pretty interesting discussion around what makes Geralt interesting, and I kind of never got into The Witcher before that in any way, Charles, because I think somehow I had this misinterpretation of The Witcher as if it was just like a Basham show about like fighting monsters without any depth to it. So I was kind of like, I don't know if that's for me.
Because it was a video game or what?
I guess it was a combination of a video. That it was a video game, and that I knew it was about a monster hunter, and I also my friend Alex, who watches the show, I kind of sometimes assume that if he's into it, then it must be like a meathead show, which is not fair to Alex. I'm sorry if you're listening, Alex. You're a man of much depth, but I don't know. I misinterpreted a lot of things, and then you, Charles, were saying that a lot of it deals with these matters of morality that Geralt has to grapple with, and I think those are the true enemies that Geralt must face are these moral questions.
Yes, on the surface, he is a man who's paid to kill monsters, but then you have to ask yourself, who's the real monster? And that's the question.
Fair.
That is what is discussed in the Witcher series. So you were inspired to watch it based off of my discussion in our protagonist series. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, we do the character series, and we did a protagonist episode. I guess hopefully that's been released by this point.
It should have been, yeah. It should have been released on August 23rd.
Oh, all right.
And this will air right after that? Right before that? Yeah. No, right afterwards. So that will air on Sunday, and then this will air on Wednesday.
Oh, great. All right. That's perfect then.
Yes.
Because as the fans may or may not know, we are currently still dealing with the fact that Charles and I recorded a bunch of episodes in advance.
Yeah, like 2 months worth.
Yeah, so we're trying to catch up and get live because we actually didn't expect that you listeners would be out there and like engaging with us on social media for a long time. So we weren't prepared to actually have to be anything resembling live because, yeah, why would we? And now we're like, oh, people are interacting with us about episodes that are way past.
We recorded a month and a half ago. We don't even remember what we... We don't even remember the jokes that were in it or anything like that. So, nope. We are trying to close that gap, but you know what? We had to come together for this extra. I guess it's technically a bonus episode because it's a
Yeah.
Wednesday. This is also a first. We were talking about firsts. This is our first non-review of reviews bonus episode. So this is also something that's very interesting that we've never done before. We're just trying to get more content to you guys. This means that in 2 weeks we will have gotten 4 episodes,
Yeah.
which will be another first for us. It's a lot of content.
Yeah, and it came about because literally I got interested after hearing Charles talk about The Witcher, and I almost started reading the books at one point, but I wanted to save that for
Save it for the
friends
show.
pitching fantasy. Yeah, so I I was able to hold myself off by watching the show, and then I was like, look, if I'm gonna watch this whole show anyway, it's a fantasy show that probably a lot of our listeners are interested in, then might as well record an episode about it. So here we are.
Yeah, and at this point, I would say I'm almost done with the series. There's several books. There's like a couple standalone books, and I've read those. And then there is the actual Witcher series, which is 5 books, and I'm on the last one, The Lady of the Lake, and I'm almost done with it. So I was holding off to watch the show until I had finished the books, but Dylan tends to get his way on these kinds of things, so I watched the show, and now we're here.
The bitterness in Charles's voice comes from the fact that we initially set out to watch all of Cursed and then record an episode of that. And
because at this moment in history, Cursed is like the #1 watched show on Netflix, and Witcher has been out for a very long time.
Yeah, so we're recording in early August like August 1st over here, and Cursed, when we were planning what we were gonna do, was #1, and
it's not anymore.
Not anymore.
It's still in the top 5, I think.
I saw Umbrella Academy was #1.
Yeah, well, that just came out today.
Rewatch. Oh, was that season 2?
No, it dropped on Friday.
Oh,
Today's Saturday, so it
that.
dropped yesterday. Yeah, we do. I was a big fan of the original. Well, I was a big fan, not huge fan.
I think I liked the first season more than you did.
Probably. Honestly, it's been so long now. It was like a lifetime ago. I don't remember much.
Well, anyway, this episode's about Witcher.
And we'll do more TV in the future, but for now, let's pivot back to...
Wait, we gotta tell the Cursed bit, though. I started that already, which is that Charles, what'd you watch, 3 episodes of Cursed or something?
Yes.
I watched like 20 minutes, and I kind of wasn't into it. I like coming with super hot takes right now, but I just was like, this doesn't catch my interest. And then I was watching Witcher, and Charles.
This whole time we had agreed to watch season 1 of Cursed, so I'm like 3 episodes in, and in my own personal life, I don't know if I would have watched past episode 1, but I was powering through. I was like getting ready, taking notes, and then it's like a few days. It's not even a week of time, but before we were scheduled to record, and you were like, "Let's just do Witcher instead." I was like, so. All this work, the 3 hours plus of work I've put into Cursed, we'll just forget, and then I'll just put like 8 hours, because I had seen the first couple episodes of Witcher, so I'll put in all these other hours in the next few days to finish it. So what can I say? I was happy to do it.
Charles, such a hero for indulging
honestly me. Cursed wasn't going anywhere. It was already becoming yesterday's news, and we could have said all this stuff about how it wasn't for us, but it wasn't a very constructive conversation that we were working towards, so we had to pivot.
Yeah, being able to pivot and be flexible is huge as a podcast host, and Charles exhibited that by watching The Witcher, and I didn't.
And you know what? It was a much more pleasant experience to watch Witcher than it was to watch Cursed. I'll say that.
That's fair.
So Here we are. we watched Witcher. We're here. We're talking about it. So I guess Dylan, if you want, because you're new to Witcher as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
you've never played the video games, you never read the books, so this is your first exposure to Witcher. Why don't you give us your first impressions?
Well, I touched on this a little bit already, but I really enjoyed just this overarching concept of exploring when something is technically a monster, or even if it is a monster, like, should we actually kill this thing? And I liked grappling with all that. Like if this person used to be a human, usually a princess, because like every other character is a princess in The Witcher, at least the TV show. It's like, you meet Renfrey. There's gonna be spoilers in this episode, like everything that we cover. There's spoilers of the thing we're covering, but in the first episode you meet Renfrey, and she's a
Mm.
princess, and then Ciri's a princess, and then there's the what was the name of that monster that used to be a princess?
The
Everyone's a
Striga,
princess in The
the
Witcher.
Striga,
Stroger, yeah, Stroger. Is that right? Okay,
Striga.
Striga. Okay, all right, that's Striga. So yeah, that's a princess. So you can pretty much assume that everything's a princess in this show until you have reason to believe otherwise. But uh, that was not my main takeaway. But I did enjoy this idea of, okay, Geralt's a monster hunter, monster killer, but he's actually got to confront these matters of like what's the lesser evil here, and how do I get involved in a way that aligns with my own morality.
Right.
And that was really cool. I also just thought that the series was really well acted. Like
Oh,
Henry
for sure. I
Cavill
mean,
is.
we talked about in the character series why, well, I did mostly, why Geralt is such a good character. And I think because on the surface, he's very much like the kind of person you thought he was before deciding to watch the show, of this just like this brutish smash him, beat him up kind of character, just like the um a violent monster bounty hunter. But what makes Witcher so good is that he is that character, and he was like trained to be that character, but he's often recruited into these situations where it's a little more complicated, and he's trying not to get involved in politics, but you can see him struggling to do the right thing. And I think Henry Cavill does a fantastic job as Geralt. Of He's very stoic, but you can see in his eyes he's like trying to decide what to do, and you can see he desperately
Yeah,
wants to do the right thing. So it was super interesting to see this guy who's very like monotone, matter of fact, but who's also internally very complicated, and how he kind of goes from situation to situation where things are getting messier and messier, and Henry Cavill does a fantastic job of acting as Geralt. That for sure,
that's
highlight
a
of the
great
series.
description that you have over there. This idea that he's stoic externally, but yeah, there's just something in those eyes, or something
Right,
in the way he
like
holds
in
himself.
there's also like that moment where I think it's episode 4 where he's at the banquet with the law of surprise and all of that,
Yep.
and he's trying to decide if he should intervene because Queen Calanthe wants to kill Dooney, or at least prevent him from marrying um, the Pavetta. So you have Geralt sitting there, and he's deciding, like, he knows that the law of surprise is like the right thing to do, and he's like, he doesn't have to get involved. It's not his place. It's not his people or anything. And
Uh
he
huh.
was pretty much invited there to help Queen Calanthe, like, be a brutish thug. Basically, everyone kind of thinks he's going to be a thug for them, but then he starts to think about it, and Henry Cavill's sitting there. You see him like thinking it out, and it was really well portrayed. And then he does ultimately, spoilers, get involved, but by defending the law of surprise and going against the queen, which
Hmm.
has all kinds of ramifications later uh,
For sure.
in Geralt's history. But it's moments like that where it's always good when a character's trying to do the right thing, and when you have something like a monster bounty hunter in these seemingly fairy tale like stories where there's usually always like a good and bad, and immoral. Sometimes it's just like it gets a little messier, and he has to decide if he's gonna get involved or not. And I thought that was really well, accurately portrayed in the
Hmm.
series.
It's
Even
awesome
in
how
the
he does
first
it.
episode with the lesser evils, I
Hmm.
prefer not to choose at all. But then we
Yeah.
know ultimately he does choose,
Yeah.
and he gets labeled a butcher for it and cast out. And so it's interesting stuff like that. That's really the meat of the show.
Is that a butcher pun?
Yes, it is.
So I really appreciate that, and something I really appreciate while we're on the topic of Geralt as the protagonist here
Hmm.
is seeing. I talked about how I really like proactive protagonists, and although
Yes.
Geralt's always talking about, hey, like I would rather choose not to make a choice than choose the lesser evil. He takes some pretty proactive actions
Oh
that
yeah, he
like
abandons that
other
almost
heroes
immediately.
would heroes is a strong word maybe for Geralt, but other protagonists might not. And I just really appreciate all the times where he's in this situation where maybe he's got to get in somewhere and there's a guard or whatever, so he's just like, okay, well, I guess I'll punch out the guard and go in. Like
Right.
there's like the guard might try to talk to him and tell him why he shouldn't go in or whatever, but Geralt's like, well, I can punch you and go in anyway, so I'm just gonna do that. And it almost reminds me of some of what we talked about with what uh Jorg
Oh
has
yeah.
from Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire. Jorg's very different in a lot of ways from Geralt, and he's a way, way worse person than Geralt is.
Yeah, Geralt is
Um,
very noble, and and
yeah,
and and York doesn't have a noble bone in his body.
no. But that attitude of like when something has to be done, then it no longer really matters what's in your way. You're just gonna go and do it, and I
Yes.
feel like that's
Yes.
something I really like about Geralt.
Right, and that's shown right away in episode 1 when he's in Blaviken and he just kills all those guys in the street. I mean, they were going to try and storm a castle and kill a lot of people in a market square to try and draw them out. So Geralt knew that a lot of innocent people would die if he didn't kill these people, but they hadn't done anything yet. So it just looked like Geralt just walked up to these
Yep.
people and killed them all. So but it wasn't a question for him of how he would be perceived. It was the noble thing to do once he decided that, like, I don't really have a choice. I tried to give her an option to like walk away from all this, and she didn't choose it. So now I have to get involved, and he definitely pays the price for a while there of being labeled the butcher of Blaviken. So no, that's what makes Geralt a good character. It's what makes The Witcher a good series, certainly.
For sure. You're talking about that first episode. First off, the fight scenes were so well
Yeah.
choreographed, especially in that
Yes.
first episode, I felt like, but throughout the show. And I mean, I guess it's no surprise to anyone that Henry Cavill can do a really good fight scene, but
Yeah.
it was incredible. His acting and just the way those things are choreographed. So I want to mention that.
Yeah, and even like the monsters were all super cool. Also, you could
Hmm.
tell they put a lot of production value into this show, and like it starts off right off the bat with the Kikimora, and I thought that was a lot of
Yeah.
fun and very entertaining. And I think maybe my favorite episode was the one where he is fighting the Striga in the abandoned section
Mm.
of the castle, and but yeah, there's so many cool like fighting set pieces throughout the show, and they look fantastic. And Henry Cavill does a great job of like learning how to hold a sword and things like that. Like he's really terrific. So
Yeah.
that was another very strong part of the show, definitely.
I really liked Renfrey as a character. It was a shame, I guess, spoilers, to see her have to go down in that first episode. She was a great actress. Emma Appleton, apparently. Uh, I don't know. She was a cool character, and I think like
She
the
was.
the arc made sense, like that it went that way to set the tone for the rest of the show. Like she didn't really have a place in the story besides the one that she played. But
But she had a
it
lot of
is,
charisma for
yeah,
sure. I felt like
yeah,
there's so many like some of my least favorite casting was with all the mages. I thought
yeah.
most of them outside of Yennefer had no like pizzazz to them at all. It was Yennefer, and then it was what's the name of the guy that was a Stregobor who was fighting against Renfrey, and he was even just like just kind of a jerky character. So,
Hmm.
and I mean, I love Yennefer as a character. She's for sure is way up there, and especially in the books. But yeah, I just they didn't have as much charm for me. So characters like Geralt and Renfrey, they were definitely much more entertaining to watch.
For sure. I mean, that first scene where she just kind of like chugs the beer, and then
Yeah.
it's like, like, ah, this is a princess. Like, that's interesting. Is uh, I don't know. She was really a cool character, so I was sad to see her go. I think, yeah, I was in that last episode. I remember thinking, so
Oh yeah.
Kay here is fighting against that like new mage that was recently introduced, and I can't remember his name. So I'm kind of sorry about
Who was
that.
fighting against the new mage?
Kay here, the guy who was chasing after Siri and then had the doppelganger uh,
Oh.
that was
Oh yeah,
taken.
yeah,
You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? That guy, the knight of Nilfgaard. Um, So he is fighting against this mage that was introduced like within the last couple of episodes, and I was like, okay, this show's asking a lot of me here to like care about two characters fighting that aren't Geralt, Yennefer, or Ciri. I guess I was like, I'm invested in all three of those characters, but other than that, I was kind of like, mm, no one
Right.
really
That
sticks
was
out.
like I don't know if like my biggest one of my biggest criticisms of this show was just the burningly fast pace it was
Hmm.
moving at. Like I have no idea why in one season they felt like they had to burn through almost two books worth of material. For me, it always felt rushed, and all these great moments with great payoffs seemed to have like they had to just keep it moving. So you never got to like sit with any of these characters eh, except for
That's
the main
totally fair.
three. And then the whole season ends where all of these mages are fighting, and you're like, so what exactly? Like, am I supposed to feel anything for these characters? Because they weren't very charismatic in the first place. They weren't very memorable in the first place. And then now we're already rushing to this end piece of a huge mage battle, and it's like that's how the show ends. So it's like, okay, well, I was never on board with any of this. At least they're gone now, so we can focus on other stuff, I suppose. But
That's totally fair. I felt so. I'm interested to hear more from you, Charles, because you've actually read the vast
mm-hmm,
majority of the books at this point.
mm-hmm,
But my impression without having read the books was I felt like the the pacing of the show did ask the viewer to do a lot of I don't know, just kind of like rolling with what they're doing now. I mean, even just with how it's like, okay, well, I guess, yeah, maybe this is a bad example because of the role that the Jin potentially played in this. But I was like, okay, I guess
mm-hmm.
Geralt and Yennefer are like really into each other all of a sudden, and I felt like
Right,
especially when it happens because you don't yet know the role that the Jin may or may not have played in that. Um, just kind of like music starts playing that indicates like, oh, this is the kind of music that means they're gonna start kissing each other. And I was like, oh, I guess they're about to kiss each other. But I wasn't like
yeah,
feeling the build up besides the fact that these are like two people that are like you know I guess like
right,
attractive people who are near each other. I guess
Right.
there's build up, but it wasn't like that moment. I was like, oh, like this romance is coming to a head here,
Right.
and I felt that with a lot of moments that it was just I'm trying to think of other good examples of that, but just yeah. There's one that like the relationship between uh, Yennefer and her mentor figure. I know they have
Yes.
a decent amount of interactions, but the moment where like she's told in one maybe this is the last episode, like she told me that you were like her greatest student ever, and I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's a moment that I should have, like I understand story wise I'm supposed to like think that's important or like take that as a big deal, but we just didn't get enough time. I felt like where that felt earned. I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess Jennifer was the best student, but she was out of there pretty quick
Right.
in terms of the like amount of episodes she actually spent training under her.
Right. And you touched on two different things. One, I'll start with the shorter conversation first, and that's with just my whole thing with Yennefer. I totally agree. For all the mage stuff was rushed because I think they just wanted to end with that magic battle and just, kind of force themselves into that. Yennefer, even to where it's like you were the best student. I felt like this whole show, Yennefer was kind of just like kind of a dick to everybody and like not nice and rude and kind of off-putting. Even though I love Yennefer as a character, her show, the version of her in the show is portrayed much more like nihilistically and much more bitter and mean than in than in the books and the games. Like she is always like a overconfident, um, kind of walking her own path kind of character, but she's much more like grounded in the books, and they do have a lot more time. Like the next thing I'll get into is much longer about the story, but they do have much more time to flesh her out. And like the books don't necessarily get into her backstory as much as the show did. Like the show started from the very beginning, which I'd never seen in the books. They never talk about where Yennefer came from. And the first time we see Yennefer in the books, I mean they talk about her, but I want to say the first story with her in it is the one with the not the genie. What's that thing called?
Jin.
The Jinn. I think that is their first story we see with Yennefer. But yeah, Geralt and Yennefer always had this bizarre kind of attraction to each other, and by the end of that story, you find their like destinies are pretty much bonded together. But the main thing I wanted to talk about that you had mentioned is the pacing of the story and the structure. Like for me, the biggest takeaway I had from this was how confusing I would say the show was. Like if I hadn't read the books, I would have had a. I feel like I would have had a much harder time understanding what was going on. It kept bouncing back and forth in time like crazy. Like in one episode and the next, you'd be like, one storyline is in the future and the other's like way in the past, but they're both presented like they're in the present. And then there's a third story, and you're just like, where are we in space and time? It's very, very bizarre. So
It's interesting.
the I'll just explain super quickly from so this first season of TV pretty much gains all of its inspiration and stories from the first two books in the Witcher series. So the way the Witcher series works, there's two books that are considered like short story collections. They're just like 300-page novels that have a bunch of different short stories in them with a framing device around them. And the way the last short story, like it starts with the Striga short story, is the very first time we meet Geralt in the first
Huh,
book called The Last Wish.
that's
And then
interesting.
the second book, The Sword of Destiny, ends with that story much more where Geralt and Ciri meet each other in that cabin. That's where the last book ends, and then the Witcher saga starts up. So basically, we introduce Ciri at the end, and then we get full on Ciri in the actual saga of The Witcher. So what I assume the show was trying to do was, look, we have three characters that everyone knows and loves: Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri, and we want to introduce them all in the pilot and start them all at the beginning, and then work our way to the end. Which
I think Yennefer's premieres in episode 2, Charles.
Okay, well, basically, they didn't show any Yennefer at all in episode 1, huh?
I think Yennefer, like episode 2 starts with Yennefer.
Okay, but basically they have these three characters and they want to tell all their stories at the beginning, from the beginning, which is not how the books did it at all. And I see the advantages to that. You want fans to meet and fall in love with these characters and become fans of these characters from the beginning. But I think having three different plots and trying to weave them in and out of each other made it more confusing than it had to be, you know? So the way the first book starts, The Last Wish, he confronts the Striga and then gets injured. You saw he turns back into the princess, but then while she's the princess, she gets him in the neck or something, and he gets badly wounded. And in the book called The Last Wish, he ends up going to a temple where he's getting healed for that wound. And while he's getting healed, he's telling stories of all these other pieces of his history. So it becomes like a framing device. So when you hear stories like The Law of Surprise and The Butcher of Blaviken and all these other things, it would always come back to this framing device that is him healing in the present day. And they talk about Yennefer, and I think Yennefer might even show up. I can't really remember, but they talk about it. So it gives you, it's almost just like an anthology of Geralt being a badass and you getting to know him. And it's all these cool moments. And then it weaves in his destiny stuff. And then it ultimately ends with him meeting Ciri. Whereas in the show, Ciri's right at the beginning. But the time traveling aspect of it to me was like, start the story where it begins and go from there. We don't need to be because characters are dead and then they're not dead and then they're dead again. You're like, what? Like the Queen Calanthe, she kept popping up and disappearing. I think she died 2 or 3 times. We saw her die, just so that we could understand where we were in time. It just felt very bizarre.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're saying all that. I think as someone who didn't really come into this with any understanding of the timeline of Witcher, or really anything about Witcher besides the very superficial stuff I was mentioning earlier. And I'll say there was a point early on where I was kind of confused, basically when the Queen is still alive in the Law of Surprise episode and things like that, and I'm like, wait, where's that's not Ciri?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought it was very demanding of the viewer for no reason, except they wanted to tell everyone's story from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I wonder how much of that could have been solved by just being more straightforward with even just putting the timestamp on what year it is or whatever.
Or even what I would have maybe encouraged them to do was, and it might be hard for someone to do, is hold back on the series storyline. Maybe even wait till the end of the season. It's tell Geralt's story and Yennefer's story. You could too, and then have the Law of Surprise, and then get to the battle, and then have the Queen die only once at the moment when she's supposed to, and then you pick up the story from there. It was just too confusing with all this other.
I mean, I liked Ciri a lot in
and
this.
I think that's why they decided to
Freya
go the way
Allen
they
did a great job portraying her. She has some really good moments. I was very impressed. When she's told by the person she was traveling with, Dara, I think it is, she's told by him, like, hey, you're gonna have to find some new family, basically, and she's like, obviously very upset by it. That scene, I was like, ugh, she's got chops. So
Yeah.
I was impressed by the main three, like all of their acting,
Oh yeah,
um,
me too. I thought they were
and
all fantastic.
that I think that does a lot of the work for making this show good. And I, I'll say though, once I kind of wrap my head around like, okay, the Yennefer stuff and the Geralt stuff is in the past long enough where like Ciri is gonna be the child that is like the child of surprise, and now she's like a teenager. So I don't know. I think if you, it is asking a decent amount, but I think like literally just understanding that one thing that like, okay, if we're seeing Geralt and we're seeing Yennefer, we just assume like that's the past, but that kept moving, to my knowledge anyway, like that kept moving forward within its own timeline, as did Ciri's story kept moving forward within her own timeline. So I think like all you need to know is that, and everything else is pretty much falls into place. So there was a moment of confusion for
Yeah,
me,
I think
but
it
I
would
think
take a
you're
few episodes of being confused before you get a handle of it, but it's not many. It's maybe 3 episodes. Like um but it does take a little while to understand where we are. But
I
I see
guess,
why they did
yeah.
it. Like I don't think it was wrong the way they did it. It's not the way I would have gone about it for sure, but it is a way and I respect it. It's a good way to introduce every character at the beginning, which generally in a show you want people to, fall in love with the main characters right away. So I get it.
I find myself resistant to the idea of writing out a character I really liked, but I could see how someone, in terms of Siri, like writing her out of the first season. So I think I could see
Yeah.
how someone who's read the books and like seen the merits of doing this a little more slow roll would be coming in saying like, it's better that way. But yeah, as someone who's only seen the show, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
why would you
And
take
then for
out
things,
someone I really liked?
and then I do feel like the pace was so fast also because
For
there's a
sure.
whole bunch of stuff like that Striga stuff is a really great story that kicks off the whole series in the books that, there's a little bit more political intrigue that gets involved in it and it's got this very gothic fairy tale like tone and it's very much a great way to start. So that was kind of missed. And then, like you said, you felt the stuff with Renfrey was rushed. It is only one story that's told in the books as well, so she doesn't last long in
I
the
don't know if
books
I'd
either.
say it was rushed. I just I like, when you like a character, you
Hmm.
wish you could get more time with them. But I
They,
do kind of think like her
you do
story
get
got
more
told.
time, but I think the character in the books did a great in the show. I mean, did a great job. Like I didn't really think twice about the character in the books because it was like one story and it was an early
Hmm.
one. But like, and she's very charismatic and impactful in the show. But the one with like 3 jackdaws and the dragon, that was so insanely rushed. Like, there's so much stuff that happens in that story that was skipped, like blown through. I was like, wow, you have this opportunity to tell this whole story and you're on a Netflix show, which could theoretically like never end, but you decide just to like burn through it. I mean, there's not that many pages of the Witcher series in total, so it was kind of surprising to me to see just how fast they were willing to burn through these short stories because they pretty much told all the good highlights from the short stories collections. So it's like the first 2 books they pretty much covered in one season. There's a bunch of other stories in them that I'm sure they'll tell, but those were the main ones, and it was
Can I mention something about
ambitious.
Yennefer while we were talking about some of this pacing stuff?
Yeah.
I think this is the example I was reaching for with her and couldn't think of before is how quickly she goes, at least in terms of the pacing of the show, not in terms of like the decades or whatever that passed.
Hmm.
The How quickly she goes from this like I'm gonna give up whatever I can to change these things about myself. And yeah, of course, it's cool that I like won't be able to ever have a baby. Like that's not even something that seemed to be on her mind so much. And then all
Yes.
of a sudden, it's like her one of her main arcs that she's dealing with is maybe her main arc is that she wants to figure out how to like be able to have a baby again. I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't buy in just because she like had that one moment in whatever episode it was where she was like trying to save a baby that I'm like, oh, now you want a baby. Like I totally get it. It's like I don't know. I get decades have
Right.
passed, but you got to give us a little more of why if they're going to
It's
change
very
that
true.
dramatically.
And it could be, for all we know, it could be hundreds of years too, because, wizards are hundreds and hundreds of years old. So I don't really know how old Yennefer is by the time she meets Geralt, but my impression was that she was very old. Um, but the books don't go into Yennefer's backstory, at least the ones I've read. It's honestly, there's in the Last Wish, which is the one with the djinn, that it's like a throwaway line. Geralt was like, "You were a hunchback," and then that was like it. And so when I saw the show, I'm like, "Oh, is that Yennefer?" Like it didn't connect in my mind for a while that we were watching Yennefer in that second episode. And then it goes through all this weird stuff of her in school, which I never knew anything about, and where she makes that decision. Because when she's like, "You can't have kids," and she's like, "I don't care," I was like, "But that's her whole thing, like in the future." So it may cut hundreds of years, but yeah, I thought that was really bizarre, also. And honestly, though, in the books, she like I think Andrei Sapkowski kind of just lets that fizzle out. It doesn't really go anywhere that I've seen. Like it's just kind of like a weird thing
Spoilers.
that she's like kind of obsessed with, but it's I don't know. It was a bizarre thing. I think it's meant to like make her feel more of like a parental responsibility to Ciri, because we know that their destinies now are all tied together, and she's trying to get this like maternal bond thing going. But I agree with you, it wasn't very successful, especially when in like the scene right beforehand he was just like, "You'll never have a baby," and she's like, "I'm cool with that." it's like
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, you said you were cool with it and now you're not cool with it. I don't really sympathize with you at all,
Well,
and
we
you don't
just
even
need
like babies.
we need more than one scene to take her from. I didn't even think
Exactly.
twice
So that was one
to
of the things. I was like, what is the rush with this show? Like, why are we trying to move so quickly? It's like, a show that's afraid it's going to get canceled or something. We're just like cramming stuff in.
yeah,
I,
maybe it was.
I hope
And
yeah, they probably were like, look, it's going to be really expensive to make this. We've got Henry Cavill, let's make sure that this is a hit by telling all the best bits of the story. That could very well have been the case. I don't know, but it seems like that was the case. But I think now that I think the show, if I'm not mistaken, was like very, very popular. And I mean, they're making the spin-off and they're making a season 2. So I hope that they kind of, and I think a lot of the biggest criticism of the show was the pacing and the like time and place, the jarring time and place transitions. So I'm very optimistic about season 2.
well, yeah, I want to say I actually really liked the season. I feel like we've been
Yeah,
pretty
me too.
critical in this episode, and I think the pacing stuff does stick out as like, what was going on here? And some of these like character motivation things move. They feel like they move quickly because of the pacing, I guess. So it's all wrapped in when it comes to that bit. And yeah, but I liked it a lot. The show looked beautiful. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a very good-looking show.
and
The
back to
monsters were amazing also.
yeah, monsters look great. The cinematography, I don't know, just the landscapes. I didn't look into where it was filmed or whatever, but it's was really cool. I don't know. It's something I really liked about this, and this is probably just Witcher in general,
Hmm.
not just the show, I guess. But it's I think that this modern fantasy is missing a lot of these return to the like monster fighting stuff that
Yeah.
like is a lot of its roots actually. I mean even just like the roots of mythology that obviously fantasy draws a lot from, and just like Dungeons and Dragons, which is a lot of people's introduction to fantasy. And as someone
Sure.
who like I'm not currently in Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but I played it and love it. And I think I was really excited. I know I said I was like, I want this meathead Basham version of it, but I was really excited for something that was going to take a thoughtful modern fantasy type approach to fighting against monsters. The only other thing
Right.
that comes to mind immediately as something that I've read that does that well is, for very different reasons than Witcher, is Kings of the Wild, and that the Band series by Nicholas Eames does
Hmm.
that well, and that's a tease because I'm gonna pitch that one to you soon, but
Uh-oh.
yeah, but I think as someone who's read I'm I'm the one who's obsessed with all these like modern fantasy things based on this revolution of George saying like people are the real monsters, so I wasn't going to put in orcs and stuff. But I think it's nice to see this kind of like, hey, the like monsters and stuff have a place in a modern fantasy, like for a modern fantasy audience.
I agree 100%. One of the things that drew me to Witcher, it has a charm to it. It's heavily inspired from like, folklore and mythology, and folklore and mythology has all these like violent things in it, like, oh, this is a monster that will eat you in your sleep, and like boil kids alive and stuff, like those old like fable-y kind of stories. And Witcher takes those monsters and stories and brings them into this modern fantasy world. It's really quite interesting. And I mean, a bounty hunter is badass. Like they're cool. And then a
For
bounty hunter that
sure.
kills monsters is even more cool. And then you weigh that with, politicking and morality. Like when you think about it, when you go back to like the Striga, it's basically it's the king had an incestuous relationship with his sister. She got pregnant. She was killed while pregnant, and this monster crawled out of the womb of the corpse. It was like it's hardcore stuff.
That is, yeah, creepy stuff.
And it's like that's how kind of monsters are made. It's by like mankind twisting something sacred and turning it into something horrible, something as sacred as an unborn, like a newborn baby, and love and pregnancy, and twisting it all and corrupting it all, and that's what creates a monster. And then Geralt has to go kill the monster, but he decides not to kill it and instead try and save it, almost at the cost of his own life. So it's very, very interesting, and those moments are the ones for me that shine the brightest in the show. And that's what makes it so good. And all those scenes are done incredibly well, like the Kikimora, the dragons, the Striga, the even that poor like weird monster thing that night guy just like killed. It's like cut off
Yeah.
all the limbs and then started hacking it. You're like, wow. Like they all looked, yeah, incredible. So it really made that show come alive. So yes, as much as I like had reservations about the time traveliness of it and the pacing of it, it is an incredibly well produced show. And I was very entertained watching it. And reading the books also, it kind of brings you back to that what you were talking about, that like return to form kind of fantasy. It's only like 300 pages and it's just fun to read, which when you read some of these meatier longer series, they're always fun to read, but sometimes it's nice to just have something a little more, for lack of a better word, popcorny. Like Witcher still has substance, but it has this more of this like popcorn movie element to it, of like it's entertaining, it's fun, it's short, it's fast. And I think the show captured a lot of that really well.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, that's what I that's part of what I most liked about this show is all that return to form stuff that we're talking about, and to to do it with this more nuanced, I think, take than oftentimes a Dungeons and Dragons campaign might have, or than you'd see in some really old school fantasy where like a monster would just by its inherent nature be evil, but then in Witcher we have a moment where that thing that the knight killed,
Yeah.
Geralt is just like, if we just gave it some food, it would go away. It was probably just starving.
Yeah.
And I really like that.
And then it was like, "Begone, foul beast," and just like brutalized it. The poor
Yeah.
monster was like screaming in pain. It was, and then they all just were making fun of the knight the rest of the time. So that was a good moment.
For sure. I also, another good moment, this is totally different, but I loved in the last episode where he saves that that guy with the caravan or whatever. He saves his
Right.
life. Geralt saves that guy's life. And then, but Geralt gets bit by one of those zombie things, whatever those were. And then Geralt's kind of like hallucinating in the back of this thing. And then, like, that guy still feels like, hey, I owe you something when Geralt has gotten healed and come to. And he's like, I'll offer you, he's like, I don't have much, but I'll offer you like the law of surprise. Like, what I have not, I will give to you or whatever. And Geralt's like, please just give me an ale and let's call it a deal. Like, the law of surprise has brought him so much trouble at this point already. It's like, please just get me a beer.
Right. I agree. No, and that was another unfortunate thing that they sped through in like 20 minutes is that whole story. And when he meets his mom and everything, it's so much more like they actually have like a full on dialogue and you learn more about them and more about Geralt than his mom and all those things. But they just breezed through it like a fever dream in that episode, which was unfortunate, but they're trying to get to Ciri, and that's a great moment in both the books and the show when their paths finally kind of intersect.
It
and
is
it's
a great
like,
moment.
when Destiny brings them together like that, and he's like, finally, because he was, trying so hard to get to her, and then Destiny intervened anyway, so it was a great moment.
It's so cute when she hugs
Yeah,
him.
it was very cute.
It's like she just knows she's been looking for this guy, and it's like almost the last remnant of her family in some ways, because this is like what her grandma said is like, look, I can't help you anymore, but I'm passing you on to this guy Geralt, and she just knows it's him.
I did like Calanthe and how she kept trying to trick Geralt and
Yeah, that was fun.
just prevent everyone from prevent Destiny from taking her granddaughter away, and like tried to hide the kids and tried to prevent Dooney from marrying her. She's not afraid to like confront Destiny and shake things up, and it was a fun character. It was sad to see her go, but she's another one that had to go.
For sure. Well, that's any other thoughts on The Witcher that you want to discuss here, Charles? I feel
Well, I would say, like, what did you think of Jasker and his music, the bard?
Oh, I was thinking when I said there were only 3 characters that I was like really invested in. I'll say a little bit after I said that, I was like, oh, I did like the bard in my head.
It's so funny. I was so confused. I was like, wait, what are they calling him? And I had to do some research. So Andrzej Sapkowski's Polish, right? So the books were written in Polish. And when they were being translated into English, I read that apparently Jasker is a flower, but it translates to buttercup or something like that. And I guess
or
the English...
dandelion, apparently.
No, it translates to buttercup. And the translator was like, I'm not naming this character Buttercup, and named him Dandelion. And... instead. And then the audiobooks, it's funny, it's the same audiobook narrator, but for the short story collections he calls him Dandelion, and then when the saga starts he switches it to Dandelion.
Oh
and
my, that's so
I'm
funny.
so confused. And but then I guess the show decided to just keep the Polish name Jasker. So
That's a fair call.
I
That was a
agree.
good portrayal from Joey Beatty. I hope I'm pronouncing his names correctly.
Yeah, that
Um,
is difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, to be like that, bard, charismatic type. You don't want to come off cringy. You don't want to come off like a Johnny Depp wannabe. You're trying to be like the comic relief. That's a tough role, especially in the
he
series
nailed
like The
it,
Witcher. And yeah,
I thought.
I would
I
agree. I
mean,
think he did a
I
great
never
job.
thought he was cringy or
Oh
anything
no, me
like
neither. I'm
that.
saying that's the risk that comes with that kind of
Yeah,
role.
yeah, yeah.
Like that role can, like the comic relief character can either be like the fan favorite or the eye roll cringe character. And I think he nailed it. Dandelion, or I guess Jasker, is is a great character in both the shows and the movies. He's very funny, and he's always
The
getting himself
shows
into
and the
trouble.
books, you mean?
Yeah, what did I say?
Movies.
Oh, yeah, no, shows and books, and the video game too. Um, so very charismatic guy, very funny. Um, he ends up becoming like the traveling buddy for Geralt for like most of the series, and they have a good partnership. Like for some reason, Geralt like is acting like he's tolerating him at all times, but they actually develop like a really close friendship, and you can see that in the show where it's just like, why am I traveling with you? It's like, just leave me alone. But he can't just seem to quit him. They're just too close. They're just buddies.
Well, I
And
thought that as these things went with the pacing and stuff like that, I felt like their relationship, they got down perfectly the pacing of
yes,
that in the show.
yes,
Like they
yes,
never tried to make you believe they were further along than they actually were. And you did get this
agreed.
idea of a lot of this time passing, and it it never felt to me like it felt with a lot of other characters and their relationships and stuff. It never felt like we were being asked to believe more than what we've seen.
Exactly. And, they did it right. They started with that story where they were captured by, they were attacked by that goat with the metal balls, and then they were captured by the elves, and they escaped. And then that's when, I'll call him Jasker, even though it'll always be Dandelion to me. Jasker writes that song with all those embellishments and basically makes Geralt famous. And that was a great way to start it. And that was a great song. I like that they wrote that song and made it like a big thing. And it was a really great moment.
It is really good.
I always love a good
I mean,
bard
that's
character.
another. Well, yeah, that's a thing, right? That's another thing that I appreciate about this in the Dungeons and Dragons type feel to it, where it's just like bards are awesome. Bards are a critical part of a good D&D party, and when they're well done, they're a lot of fun. And to just unabashedly have just like a bard and to play the trope straight, but do a good job of it, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
They're
No, it's a
they're
lot
not
of
trying to
fun.
subvert the bard or anything. They're just,
No.
hey, here's a good bard.
Yes, yes. There's a lot of Witcher that's like hey, here's just a good classic fantasy tale, and the show stayed true to that, and I'm a huge fan. Netflix didn't meddle too much with the source material. It'll be interesting to see if they go like really into the Witcher saga, or if they'll kind of tell their own tale. I'd be happy with either one, honestly. But Dylan, are you gonna pick up the video games now? Or at
Uh,
least Witcher 3?
really, what I will play Witcher 3 at some point. That is pretty much a guarantee. All this comes down to, and we can have some off the air conversations because they probably won't be interesting for listeners, about just story wise what the best way to
The
go
games
about
to
this
tell
is, because
their own thing.
I feel like there's got to be like some serious spoilers to playing
only
Witcher
that
3 when I
characters
haven't read
may
any
or
of
may
the
not
books.
be dead, like if that's
Hmm.
that might be the only thing. But even then it's hard to tell where in time you are.
All right.
Like
Well, I mean, if it's go ahead,
the
Charles.
books
Sounds
and
like
the
you.
show tell the same story so far. It's like if you were to read the first two standalone books, like the short story collections, you will have gotten everything that was in the show for the most part.
Hmm.
But if you played Witcher 3, it would be in the very, very distant future. And like Ciri is like a young woman. She's like maybe early 20s, I guess, in Witcher
That's a
3.
spoiler.
Um, so it's like, is that a spoiler?
I mean,
That's
you're
about
playing
as
pretty
much.
fast. You're playing pretty fast and loose with your series knowledge and your Siri knowledge.
I mean, this isn't. It's not like a series that's can really be spoiled. That's as far as I'm concerned. It's just like a story that keeps going, and like the stuff that happens is fun and exciting, and it goes and goes, and
Yeah, no, I'm not overly concerned, honestly, myself. I just, I fear
but
for
I
the
think
listeners who
like
come in thinking, I've
if I
seen the
was gonna
show, I'm
recommend
safe.
reading it, I would be like, you're always safe. This is a safe space.
It's not, I don't know if it's spoiler free for the, it's like
We've
very
never
gentle.
promised spoiler
For
free for
the for
anything
the
we've ever done.
for the book series. I think if you tune into a Witcher TV thing, yeah,
Then you have to have seen it.
the you have to have seen the show.
Yeah.
But is it fair game to reveal things about the story that happened down the line in the book series or that are portrayed in the video game? I don't know. I mean, you tell us, listeners.
You tell us. I don't. I think the games are their own thing, not related to the book. The book and the show seem to be intertwined, but the game is out in its own stratosphere. That's the impression I get.
Okay. I mean, if you're feeling that, having played the game and also
I mean, I'm like in the
read
first
the
quarter
book
of the game,
series.
but yeah, I'm
Oh.
almost done with the book series, and it seems like the games take way past anything I've read in the books. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
That's an interesting choice.
I mean, I would assume again, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes,
Hmm.
but they mention things in the game that are consistent with the book, but the stories are totally different.
Well, I'll pick it up at some point. That's
Give it a
that's
pick
pretty
up.
much a guarantee. I hear it's a great game.
It
I'm
is.
enjoying the Witcher story, so I'm not gonna
And who knows,
overthink this one.
maybe The Witcher will appear on a very soon upcoming episode of Friends Talking Fantasy. We'll see.
Hmm.
When I say very soon, it really would be several months because still have to read Lord of the Rings, but
Oh, you mean
who
Friends
knows?
pitching fantasy?
Well, yeah, in the future, and then
Yeah.
maybe even the more distant future than that, if we actually
No.
decide to read it. Who knows?
Well, that is my choice, Charles. I
It'll be up to
I
you. It
will.
depends on what I decide to pitch.
True, but I'll have at least 3 choices when you do. So, but The Witcher is gonna be a strong candidate because I'm into this story, and I think I at the very least would have a hard time making that one my desk rejection. I think I'd want to hear you pitch those books. So.
Mad respect. Anything we should say before we part ways with the fans?
Not really. If you want to talk about the Witcher TV show, you can hit us up on the Insta, as the kids are calling it.
Hit us up.
You can follow us at the FTF Podcast 1 on Twitter.
Twitter, yeah.
And
Hit us up on the
we're-
Insta. Here's our Twitter handle.
well, okay. If you search for Friends Talk, I don't know even what our Insta. Do you even have an Instagram
Yes.
handle?
Yes, it's the FTF Podcast. Same with Facebook. Twitter is the
Okay.
FTF Podcast with the number 1. Our email is theftfpodcast@gmail.com.
I feel like people aren't gonna people just would search Friends Talking Fantasy.
Yeah, but if it was the case where our SEO wasn't as amazing as it is, and a bunch of things popped up and they weren't sure which one is us, it's the @FTF podcast is the unique identifier that would help them find us.
That's fair, but I did just type. I mean, maybe it's biased because I'm typing in on the FTF podcast Instagram account. But when I type in Friends Talking Fantasy on Insta, we do come up first. So hopefully that's the case for people who that's not their actual account.
Hopefully.
And yeah, hit us up there. Send us an email or whatever at the ftfpodcast@gmail.com.
Do that.
And I'm always down to chat. You know that.
We love to chat with the fans.
Yeah.
We always reply. We have an 100% reply rate so far.
That's not true.
Well, of all the actual people, and not like spammers and
that's a real person, Charles. We had a post that very much seems to be by a real person that I haven't responded to. But I don't know. It was I don't want to diss one of our fans.
They're clearly not a fan. It's clearly either like someone who just is texting weird stuff, messaging weird stuff to a lot of accounts, or is a bot. And I think you'd be surprised how many bots are on Instagram, bro.
A bot that... It was a very specific message, and it was in
keyword
a clear...
search, like the word faith, for example, and then spam weird messages to anything that says faith.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But the whole thing with the...
But they didn't mention anything
with the tennis
specific
stuff?
to the post and the profile or anything.
That's fair. Maybe it was a bot. If it was a bot, then I don't feel odd about outing them, but...
I would assume when it's a long rambling that means nothing and doesn't address anything mentioned in the post. Like, all of our other direct messages have been like, hey, like the show, or what's going on with the show, or, you know, like this, I like this series.
This
whatever.
sounds interesting. Like,
yeah.
Like, oh, thank you. And then there's like,
we love you so much. This changed my life. This is a great
we don't get a
show.
lot of that.
I love your opinions. But it would be
Charles
nice to
seems
hear.
grumpy, but I like Dylan. That one comes up a lot.
Grumpy. It comes up never. You put me in these positions where I have to defend myself.
All right. Well, with that,
as the man who controls the outro music, I'm going to go ahead and play us out. Hopefully this isn't too loud for you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been another exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Thank you so much for listening to our bonus episode, a very, very unique first-time series discussion of The Witcher on Netflix. If you liked it, let us know. Thank you all for listening, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.